Mia was setting the table as a hostess. She did everything right. There were pickles and tomatoes, lecho, and all the vegetables from her garden, prepared with her own skill. The fluffy potatoes were also from her garden, the chicken roasted in the oven came from her own hen house, and there was homemade sausage, nicely browned. An apple pie from her orchard was baking in the oven, and everything was ready for the arrival of her daughter and her fiancé. Everything was in order, both inside the house and outside, and even beyond the yard. Mia had also taken care of herself. She had done her hair and even managed a manicure, which was hard to reconcile with the rural work she had been doing. She didn't want to make a bad impression in front of her future son-in-law. She wanted him to see that people in the village lived no worse than city folks and that her daughter, Wendy, who was from the countryside, had nothing to be ashamed of. This wasn't a matchmaking event, just a meeting. The young couple had come together and were living together now, and the wedding would come later if, as they said, they suited each other. Mia found it puzzling. Wendy might not even get married, living with one man and then another, and time was passing, while youth was not increasing. Right now, Wendy was only 20, and she didn't appreciate her youth. Time flew so quickly, and you couldn't turn it back. Mia herself had lived her life just getting by, youth had flown by unnoticed, and now she was 40. She had never known female happiness. She got married at 19, and Wendy was born when Mia was 20. Back then, when people married, they immediately had children. They didn't live like they do now. They believed that a true family was one with children. Mia had married Bobby, seemingly out of love, and Bobby seemed to love her. A lot of time had passed since then, and she didn't remember what their feelings had been like. When Wendy was a year and a half old, Bobby started drinking, and Mia never saw him sober again. She didn't even understand when and how her husband became addicted to drinking. There was no time to keep track of him. She had a small child, and on top of that, there was the household, the garden, the poultry, the piglet, and the goats. She had to feed everyone, clean the pans, and milk the goats, while Bobby came home drunk every day. When Wendy was 7 and started first grade, Bobby died that same year. He drank himself to death with burnt vodka. There was no hospital in the village, and by the time they figured out what was wrong with him and took him to the city, it was too late. That was Mia's life. Even though she was a good-looking and hard-working woman, she never married again. But who in the village could she marry? Even drunks and families were still men. Villages didn't waste men. There was no fashion for fleeing the village for a better life. It was believed that you made do with where you were born. Of course, if someone wanted to continue their education after school, they would go to the city, but then they usually returned home to the village. Nowadays, young people ran to the city but never came back, so Wendy went to the city, studied to become a nail technician, and had no intention of returning to her family home. Mia thought that was right. The city offered more opportunities, both in terms of work and personal life. Mia saw through the window that a car had pulled up to the house. Her Wendy and a young man got out of it. Mia quickly applied lipstick, fluffed up her hair, looked in the mirror, and, satisfied that she looked good, went out to greet her guests. Wendy was the first to enter the wicket. She was saying something to the man, laughing and waving her arms. The man was laughing too. They seemed happy. "Oh, Mommy!" Wendy shouted, "Hello, Mommy." Wendy turned to the man and introduced him to her mother. "And this is Carl, my Carl." Only Carl raised his eyes and looked at Mia. Something unspoken happened between him and Wendy's mother as soon as their eyes met. Mia realized she was missing something. Carl saw in front of him a woman, one like his Wendy, only older, with a sad smile that gave her special charm. Mia was setting the table as a hostess, doing everything just right. There were pickles and tomatoes, lecho, and all the vegetables from her garden, prepared with her own skill. The fluffy potatoes were also from her garden, the chicken roasted in the oven was from her own hen house, and there was homemade sausage, nicely browned. An apple pie from her orchard was baking in the oven. Everything was ready for the arrival of her daughter and her fiancé. Everything was in order, both inside the house and outside, and even beyond the yard. Mia had also taken care of herself. She had done her hair and even managed a manicure, which was hard to reconcile with the rural work. She didn't want to make a bad impression in front of her future son-in-law. She wanted him to see that people in the village lived no worse than city folks and that her daughter, Wendy, who was from the countryside, had nothing to be ashamed of. This wasn't a matchmaking event, it was just a meeting. The young couple had come together and were living together now, and the wedding would come later, if, as they said, they suited each other. Mia found it puzzling. Wendy might not even get married, living with one man and then another, and time was passing. Youth was not increasing. Right now, Wendy was only 20, and she didn't appreciate her youth. Time flew so quickly, and you couldn't turn it back. Mia herself had lived her life just getting by, youth had flown by unnoticed, and now she was 40. She had never known female happiness. She got married at 19, and Wendy was born when Mia was 20. Back then, when people married, they immediately had children. They didn't live like they do now. They believed that a true family was one with children. Mia had married Bobby seemingly out of love, and Bobby seemed to love her. A lot of time had passed since then, and she didn't remember what their feelings had been like. When Wendy was a year and a half old, Bobby started drinking, and Mia never saw him sober again. She didn't even understand when and how her husband became addicted to drinking. There was no time to keep track of him. She had a small child, and on top of that, there was the household, the garden, the poultry, the piglet, and the goats. She had to feed everyone, clean the pans, and milk the goats, while Bobby came home drunk every day. When Wendy was 7 and started first grade, Bobby died that same year. He drank himself to death with burnt vodka. There was no hospital in the village, and by the time they figured out what was wrong with him and took him to the city, it was too late. That was Mia's life. Even though she was a good-looking and hard-working woman, she never married again. But who in the village could she marry? Even drunks and families were still men. Villages didn't waste men. There was no fashion for fleeing the village for a better life. It was believed that you made do with where you were born. Of course, if someone wanted to continue their education after school, they would go to the city, but then they usually returned home to the village. Nowadays, young people ran to the city but never came back. So Wendy went to the city, studied to become a nail technician, and had no intention of returning to her family home. Mia thought that was right. The city offered more opportunities, both in terms of work and personal life. Mia saw through the window that a car had pulled up to the house. Wendy and a young man got out of it. Mia quickly applied lipstick, fluffed up her hair, looked in the mirror, and, satisfied that she looked good, went out to greet her guests. Wendy was the first to enter the wicket. She was saying something to the man, laughing and waving her arms. The man was laughing too. They seemed happy. "Oh, Mommy!" Wendy shouted. "Hello, Mommy." Wendy turned to the man and introduced him to her mother. "And this is Carl, my Carl." Only Carl raised his eyes and looked at Mia. Something unspoken happened between him and Wendy's mother as soon as their eyes met. Mia realized she was missing something. Carl saw in front of him a woman, one like his Wendy, only older, with a sad smile that gave her a special charm. Then there were the eyes, with a look that made his heart race. His heart was pounding so hard that he thought both Wendy and Mia could hear it, thus giving away his excitement. As they sat down at the table, the guests praised the food, and Mia glanced furtively at Carl. She was afraid to meet his frank gaze, afraid that he would see in her the appeal of a woman who was hungry for a man. Mia knew for sure that he understood everything about her, and she understood him. Just like that, they sat at a distance from each other, their hearts already together, and their bodies were reaching for each other. But between them was Wendy, her little girl who didn't notice anything. "What's in it for me? I don't want it. I don't want it," her mind screamed, but her soul demanded love, Carl's love. Mia could hardly wait for them to leave. It was hard to look into her daughter's eyes and into Carl's. A sleepless night passed in thought and agony. Mia knew that Carl would bring grief to both Wendy and her. Her heart told her that Carl would come here, but without Wendy. He would come to her, to Mia. She was sure of it. I certainly won't accept him. I refuse him. Wendy is more important to me, she thought. Mia had never experienced such emotions before. In her chest, love for Wendy and love for a man 10 years younger than herself were jostling together. These two feelings were too cramped in Mia's heart, and she moaned, painfully. In the evening, when it had already gotten dark, Carl's car arrived at Mia's house. He did not enter but burst into the house, and without saying a word, embraced Mia and began kissing her. She couldn't resist. At that moment, there was only Carl and her. When it was all over, and the first wave of passion had receded, Mia felt like a thief, stealing happiness from her daughter. When they were lying in each other's arms, Mia's phone rang. "Mom, Carl is missing," Wendy cried on the other end of the line. "This has never happened before, and his phone is unreachable." "Something's happened, Mom," Wendy screamed in despair. "I don't think anything has happened to Carl," Mia reassured her. "He'll come, Wendy, you'll see. His phone is probably dead. Don't worry so much, everything will be fine." "I've never lied to you," Mia was being deceitful. That phrase always reassured Wendy, but now her mother had lied to her. "Go to bed, dear, he'll come," Mia said, feeling a weight and guilt in her chest. "I want to be with you, Mia," Carl said after hearing the conversation between mother and daughter. "Our meeting is fate, and you can't renounce love. I'll call Wendy now so she doesn't worry and tell her I'll be coming soon." "Mia, call him." "You're an adult man, you should understand," she replied. "Carl, life is short, and love can be a one-time thing. We live only once, we might not have tomorrow. We need to live here and now." Carl tried to convince her of the correctness of her decision. "We are happy together, and why should we hide and conceal, especially when it comes to our feelings? You're still a young woman, Mia. Don't you want to be happy? This modern call to live here and now is not for me. I have a tomorrow, and tomorrow will come. I don't know about you, but for me, it will come, and tomorrow I see my happy Wendy, a grandchild whom I will adore. If I tie my life to you, I'll lose my tomorrow. Leave Carl forever from our lives with Wendy, this is my final word." Now Mia knew no peace. She felt like a traitor to her daughter, a thief who had taken love and happiness from Wendy. Mia didn't know if Carl would listen to her or if her daughter would stay with her. He had promised nothing when he left. More than anything, Mia feared that one of the neighbors would see him. As they say, getting caught with a man. She didn't want that because, in a village, if something happens at one end, by evening, everyone at the other end knows about it. Mia had an unblemished reputation, and suddenly a man came to her at night and left the same night. Women would gossip for a couple of weeks, and after that, nothing would clean off. She remembered Carl's look when they parted and only now realized that they were not saying goodbye but rather parting. Parting implies a meeting, and now, along with the guilt before her daughter and the love for Carl, was the hope of meeting him again. She both didn't want and wanted to see him. The conflict between these feelings made her weak. After all, she was a woman, she had the right to be weak. She had been strong all her life, and now her strength had depleted. She needed a strong man with whom she could allow herself to be weak. Mia called Wendy 2 days after meeting Carl. Wendy was in a great mood, and everything indicated that she was with Carl. Mia was jealous of Carl for her daughter, she didn't recognize herself. It hurt to hear her daughter's enthusiastic words about her chosen one. Mia knew it was all wrong, but she couldn't do anything about it. After talking to her daughter, Mia thought that Carl might not have decided to leave Wendy right away. Indeed, she thought, Wendy had just introduced me to her fiancé, and he would suddenly leave her after only 3 days, that would be suspicious. Of course, some time should pass, everything went on as usual. Mia calmed down a bit and attributed all these emotions to the long absence of a man in her life. With every car passing by the windows of the house, her heart treacherously jolted. What if? What if? She asked herself. No, what ifs, Mia admonished herself. She absolutely didn't want to see Carl, but she wanted to see him again. That was the whole truth she was running from but couldn't escape. For a while, the emotions subsided because Mia wasn't feeling well at all. She had troubled herself with her worries. She seemed sick, but not really sick. Yet something was wrong. Perhaps menopause had started, certainly early, but at this age, women begin to experience changes in their bodies, Mia thought. Not everyone, of course, but some women have early menopause. Maybe that's what's happening to me. The sooner, the better, these carnal desires will fade away. She kept postponing her trip to the district center for a doctor. Night or no night, I have to go. Who knows what ailment has crept into my body? It might not be menopause at all. Anything could be possible. I need to rule out diseases and hear the doctor's recommendations regarding my body's adjustments. The doctor stunned Mia with the news: pregnancy, 6 weeks. The ultrasound will give a more accurate result. You'll need to have some tests done. The doctor smiled widely. Will you continue the pregnancy? Mia, hearing these words, was in a sort of unreal time, as if she wasn't herself and the doctor wasn't talking to her. The news had shocked her so much. Well, what's the decision? The doctor broke the silence. I don't know, Mia snapped back to reality. Then think about it. The time for terminating a pregnancy isn't endless, the doctor said sternly. You'll need to have the tests done regardless. Mia could think of nothing else but the life growing inside her. It was her second pregnancy, and it was due to love. She didn't want to get rid of the baby. Her life would take on new colors. A baby, such happiness. But she was completely alone. Wendy had grown up, had her own life, and could be said not to need her anymore. Mia tried to convince herself, with the baby, my life will have meaning. Mia smiled at herself and, stroking her belly, said, Don't be afraid, little one, Mommy won't let anyone harm you. But what would she tell Wendy? What would she say to the villagers, to Carl, and to the child when he asks about his father? Once again, she had to choose and make all the decisions herself. She had to become strong again. The main decision was made. No matter what, the baby would be born, and the rest of the problems would be solved as they arose. Mia decided. How did Scarlett O'Hara say? I'll think about it tomorrow. So, I'll leave all the answers to my questions for tomorrow. For a child to grow up healthy, they need not a hysterical mother but a calm and balanced one. Mommy, hi. Can you believe it? Carl and I are having a baby. Wendy triumphantly announced. Mia wasn't expecting this turn of events. What was she expecting? Her daughter and Carl lived like husband and wife. Why are you silent, Mom? Are you happy? I'm happy, Mia replied. In her emotional state, she didn't catch the maternal concern. Does Carl know? Mia asked. Not yet, I'll tell him this evening. He'll be thrilled. Of course, we're getting married. Our child should be born in marriage. Mia wanted to shout, but she quietly said, Of course, Wendy, you'll be happy. I really want that. Mom, should I send your regards to Carl? Chirped the happy Wendy. Send them, Mia said. Mia was already asleep when the phone rang. She felt like she wanted to sleep all the time now, and she didn't immediately realize what was happening. She thought it was a dream, but the phone kept ringing insistently. It was an unfamiliar number. Probably a wrong number, she thought, and ended the call. But the phone rang again. She answered. Mia, I'm coming to you now, she heard Carl's voice. Why? The woman asked in surprise. I miss you. We need to talk. She remembered that Wendy was supposed to tell Carl about her pregnancy, and her heart started pounding wildly. What do you mean, coming now? Wendy will be alone. Wendy is asleep, Carl replied. I said I had to leave urgently for work. I'm on my way. I'll be there soon. Carl burst in and grabbed Mia in his arms, lifted her up, and twirled her around. Mia felt nauseous and lightly pushed Carl away. I miss you. I miss you, he whispered. I can't fight this. I love you. She looked him in the eyes intently and reproachfully, yet that didn't stop him from getting Wendy pregnant. You continued living with my daughter, Mia said. I asked you to leave both her and me. Well, men are so weak. What now? Can you solve your problems on your own, or did you think that two women should solve them for you? Everything is piled up. Wendy is pregnant, but I love you. She's so happy to become a mother. I can't forbid her that. Carl, you need to leave both me and Wendy. I hope you understand how you're complicating our lives. Carl didn't answer. He tried to hug Mia, but each time she wouldn't allow it, fearing she wouldn't be able to resist. Carl made her feel weak. I'll leave Wendy. I'll leave tomorrow, but don't drive me away, Mia. I want to be with you. Move to the city, and we'll live together. Mia didn't let him finish. Do you think I'd trade Wendy for you? Are you out of your mind? Leave Wendy. We'll raise the child ourselves, and now leave and forget the way here. Mia wanted Carl to leave as soon as possible. She feared she wouldn't be able to resist and would end up embracing him again. For the sake of the child she was carrying, Mia decided not to tell him anything. Perhaps he would never know about the baby. Everything was too entwined. Despite the various troubles, Mia felt happy. She considered everything happening in her life at that moment as troubles that would eventually sort themselves out, and everything would fall into place. The main thing was that the pregnancy brought her happiness and peace. To avoid harming the baby, Mia prepared herself to stay calm. The only thing troubling her was Wendy. Although Wendy was young, her pregnancy was difficult, with threats of miscarriage, and she often had to stay in the hospital for bed rest. Wendy suffered greatly after Carl left her. This period was the hardest for the two women. Wendy was beside herself with betrayal and grief and was tempted to get rid of the baby. She begged her beloved to stay with her, thinking that the pregnancy would scare him, and promised to get rid of the baby. But Carl was adamant in his decision to leave Wendy. It turned out that I don't love you, but the baby is not to blame. I will be a father to him and will never abandon him, Carl said. If you don't want the baby, I'll take him and raise him myself. Mia was also against Wendy getting rid of the pregnancy. Wendy succumbed to her mother's pleas and Carl's, and who else could she listen to? These are her closest people. She decided to keep the baby, hoping that when the baby is born, Carl would return to her, and she would try to keep him by her side. In the 4th month of pregnancy, Wendy took a leave of absence and went to her mother's village, where the fresh air, natural products, and the warmth and calmness of her mother would be beneficial for both her and her baby. A whole month in the village, a whole month of peace. Due to Wendy's frequent stays at the parental center, mother and daughter had only seen each other 5 times. Recently, when Mia came to visit Wendy at the hospital, Mia's belly was not noticeable because it was spring, and she wore a loose-fitting coat. But now her belly was visible. It was summer. Mia wore a light dress, and she was already 5 months pregnant. The baby had started moving. Oh, Mom, how much you've gained weight, the naive Wendy said with a smile. I think you're pregnant too. But I am pregnant. It's a boy, Mia said. Wendy raised her eyebrows in surprise and didn't believe her mother's words. I'll take that as humor, Wendy laughed. It would be funny if I gave birth and you did too. Our village would be in shock. The village women had already noticed Mia's belly and were gossiping among themselves, but they didn't dare to ask her directly to confirm their suspicions. And why bother? When the baby is born, it will be impossible to hide. I'm not joking, Wendy. We're 3 to 4 weeks apart in our due dates. I'm going to give birth. I'm having a son, as they say. You're a cut-off piece, and I'm here dying of loneliness, so I decided to go ahead with it. I still have time to raise my son. Wow. Wendy had no more to say. Are you upset, dear? Mia asked worriedly. No, it's just unexpected. Why, Mom, did you keep everything a secret? Was there a point? Wendy, I didn't want to upset you unnecessarily. I didn't know how you would react. And who's the father of the baby? Do I know him? Mia knew that this question would come up and was prepared for it, but when she heard it, her heart jumped and seemed to fall somewhere. No, you don't know him. It was a random affair, Mia said, both lying and telling the truth. He doesn't even know about the baby. This is only my child. I see, Wendy said, looking confused. Is Carl helping you? Mia translated the conversation to Wendy from Carl. I told you, Mom. He's helping me, visiting me, asking about my health, how our little one is developing, if I need to go somewhere. He drives me, buys groceries, and pays for the apartment where I live. Here I am with you, and he calls me every day to check how I'm doing. Sometimes it feels like we haven't broken up, just taking a small break in our relationship. Maybe things will still work out, Wendy said hopefully. Who knows what these men? Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. I don't trust them much, maybe because I've always relied only on myself. There's never been a strong shoulder to lean on. He's helping for now, but we're still not a couple. We're just parents of our little girl. She's the only thing that connects us. I hope, Mom, that with the birth of the baby, something will change, and Carl will want to come back to me, Wendy continued. She repeated several times a day that after the baby is born, Carl might come back to her. It was a sort of mantra, a mindset for her beloved's return, a shield from reality. Mom, Carl is my first and only man. I love him, she said with pain in her voice. Mia was silent. She felt sorry for her daughter, but believed it was for the best that he left Wendy since he didn't love her. It was better for everyone. Mia felt relieved. She had told the most important person in her life everything, and Wendy had accepted it. At least she behaved normally, and the rural rhythm of life was benefiting her. She worked in the garden with her mother, walked around the village, and met old school friends, one of whom was also pregnant. They and Wendy were on the same wavelength. Wendy tanned her cheeks, became rosy, and she was at peace, which pleased her mother. Wendy, after you give birth and while you're on maternity leave, move back home with me. The baby will be better here. Look how you've strengthened, Mia persuaded her daughter. We'll help each other raise the children. The hardest period is the first year, and it will be easier for us together. I don't know, Mom. Maybe I will move if Carl agrees. What if he's against it? We'll see after the birth. It's too early to make plans. Mom, Carl called. He has a day off tomorrow. He'll come to see me, Wendy said, brightening up. Mia felt weak and dizzy, as she did in the early months of her pregnancy. It was good she was sitting, otherwise she would have fainted. Mom, let's bake some pies. Carl loves pies. It will be a surprise for him. Yes, a surprise, thought Mia, but pies aren't much of a surprise compared to what can't be hidden under any clothes anymore. Yes, of course, we'll bake them. We'll prepare the filling today and bake them tomorrow. Carl loves pies with eggs and herbs and with cabbage. When Carl walked into the house, he saw a scene that would have touched anyone but not him. 2 dishes full of pies were on the table, and 2 pregnant and content women were devouring the pies with gusto. Carl was stunned and muttered something indistinctly. Hi, Wendy. Wendy jumped up and hugged him as if he were still her man, and they were so engrossed in eating pies that they didn't hear him come in. Join us. The pies are still warm. We baked them for you. Hello, Mia, Carl finally snapped out of his daze. I see they're for me, but you're eating. Is it for 3? Not for 3, but for 4, Wendy corrected him. Mom's going to have a baby too, and I have a brother. Imagine that. That's really something, Carl replied vaguely and stared at Mia. Mia blushed, stood up from the table, and fussed around. She wanted to go out into the yard but then put the kettle on the stove and asked Carl, would you like tea or coffee? I'd have something stronger, Carl replied and ran outside. Mia thought he wouldn't come back, that he'd leave for the city, but she was wrong. A few minutes later, Carl re-entered the house with a bottle of vodka. It's been in the car for about 6 months, rattling around in the trunk. I didn't forget it, but suddenly remembered. It's still warm, but never mind, it can always be chilled. A glass, Mia? A shot glass won't do, such events are unfolding. Did you get married, or are you getting married? Carl drilled Mia with his eyes. Wendy didn't understand what had so upset Carl. Was it her pregnancy that was causing such excitement? When she thought about it, her daughter should have reacted more strongly. What's the matter, Carl? Sit down, calm down, Wendy began. Wendy, I can answer all the questions myself, Mia said, though she didn't understand why she should answer them. Even my fellow villagers don't ask me about my personal life, but since a man is curious, I'll tell you that I'm not married and am not getting married, and the baby is only mine and no one else's. That happens, Carl, especially nowadays, he replied. Sorry for being curious. He poured half a glass of vodka and drank it, saying, I'm having a little for myself, you're not entitled to any, and continued eating pies while pouring himself more vodka. Carl, is everything all right with you? Wendy asked worriedly. You're drinking so desperately, I don't recognize you. It's like something happened to you. I'm just tired, Carl replied. I haven't eaten anything today, and now I'm completely drunk from the warm vodka. Can I sleep? I'm really tired. Mia and Wendy put Carl to rest and went for a walk to enjoy the sunset. You can't see such beauty in the city. Carl woke up around midnight. The silence around him was so different from the city. And such quiet, he might have slept until morning, but he was very thirsty. The vodka he had drunk earlier had dried him out, and he had to get up to get some water. After quenching his thirst, Carl couldn't fall back asleep. Thoughts buzzed in his head. He was jealous of Mia for the unknown man, angry at Mia and himself, and even at Wendy, who was unknowingly caught in the grinder of this love triangle, and whom he felt sorry for. This could be my child, Carl suddenly thought, but no, she would have told me. He quickly doubted it. He walked through the rooms and found Mia. She was sleeping soundly with her hand under her cheek, but Carl's intense gaze, or perhaps something else, woke her. Mia jolted awake and, seeing Carl standing next to her, said, You scared me, anxiously. What are you doing here? We need to talk, Carl said softly. Let's go outside. Mia sighed heavily but obediently followed Carl. The night was moonlit, cooling the summer heat, and the mingling scents of nature were inexplicably delightful. Birds chirped here and there, heralding the approaching dawn. All of this stirred Carl. They sat on a bench under a sprawling walnut tree. Carl reached towards Mia, but she firmly said, Stop. You wanted to talk, so talk. Is there something else you haven't figured out? Carl wanted to embrace Mia and sit like that until morning, to greet the dawn, have breakfast together, laugh, and rejoice in the upcoming arrival of their baby. But he knew that Wendy was between them and that the child might not be his. How he wished Mia was carrying his child. Mia, just tell me the truth, Carl began. Is this my child? He placed his hand on the woman's belly, but Mia sharply pushed his hand away and said, Don't even hope. The child isn't yours. That's a shame, Carl said. I would have liked him to be mine. I'm sincere when I say I wanted to have our children with you, to raise them together with you, to fall asleep and wake up with you. Switch to anger, Mia replied. Carl was silent for a minute and then asked, When is the baby due? When the baby arrives, Mia replied, by the due date. I could be the father. I see. Mia, you have a tumultuous personal life, you're quite in demand. Maybe at your age, it's time to settle down. Don't judge me. Mia retorted. Your life is just as turbulent. I wouldn't be surprised if, apart from Wendy and me, there are a few other girls in your sexual life. So don't try to lecture me on how to live. I'm a grown woman. I hope you've learned what you wanted to know, and since you're here, give her some attention. I wanted to see you, and I did. Well, I've seen enough. I'm leaving. Mia, tell Wendy that I had to leave. "Mom, where's Carl?" Wendy asked in surprise when she couldn't find him in the house. "He left early, not wanting to wake you. He asked me to tell you that he had to leave urgently for something to do with work." Wendy's maternity leave ended, and she had to return to the city for work. Time flew by quickly, and mother and daughter were preparing for the arrival of their babies. Wendy went on maternity leave and, after consulting with Carl, moved back to her mother's village. Carl called Wendy every evening. Their conversations were brief, but Wendy was happy that her beloved did not forget to call. That evening, Carl called as usual. Mia could hear that Wendy's tone of voice varied from high to low, and it seemed like her daughter was moaning. Mia entered the room and saw Wendy with her face buried in a pillow, crying, with the phone lying next to her. From the phone came Carl's voice shouting, "Wendy, I'll still be helping you. What does it matter where from?" Mia picked up the phone and, with a strained voice, said, "What's wrong, Carl?" Wendy was sobbing so hard she couldn't speak, so Mia spoke calmly. "Carl, I called to tell Wendy that I'm going to Germany for a year on a contract." Carl tried to justify himself, but Wendy grabbed the phone from her mother, hung up, threw it on the floor, and then began to scream, "I don't want this baby. You and Carl forced me to have it. I hate you. I'll have it and then leave it. I needed it when Carl was with me." Mia tried to embrace her daughter to calm her, but Wendy pushed her away, glaring at her mother and, through tears, sang with a broken voice, "I hate you. I hate you." In the city, one could have called an ambulance, and doctors would have handled the pregnant woman's hysteria, but in the village, it was difficult. Mia tried to calm Wendy with drops, but Wendy snatched the glass from her mother's hands and smashed it on the floor, continuing to scream, "Leave. Don't stand here. I can't stand the sight of you. Go out." Mia left the room but couldn't go far, as there were no doors. She watched Wendy from behind a curtain. After the hysteria, Wendy lay motionless on her back, staring at the ceiling and whispering something quietly. At that moment, it seemed like Wendy had lost her mind. Mia thought it was best to just wait. Wendy would come to terms with her illusions and let go of her dreams of marrying Carl. She only calmed down when Wendy fell asleep. In the morning, Wendy screamed again. "Mom!" Mia jumped at the sound of her daughter's cry and ran to her. From the table, seeing Wendy lying in a pool of blood, Mia immediately called for an ambulance. She was very worried because the ambulance in the village wasn't very fast. While waiting for help to arrive from the district, anything could happen, but there was nothing else to do but wait. "Mom, I'm going to die," Wendy called weakly. "Darling, it's probably just labor," Mia tried to soothe her, stroking her daughter's hands and kissing her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Calm down, my girl, everything will be all right. Have I ever lied to you?" But Mia's mind flashed, lied. The ambulance arrived in 40 minutes. It was an intensive care vehicle, and Wendy immediately received medical attention. Mia wanted to go with Wendy, but they wouldn't let her, citing her own pregnancy and advising her to stay home. The only way to find out anything was to call the perinatal center. Mia immediately called Carl and told him about Wendy's hysteria and that she had been taken to intensive care with bleeding. "I'm coming now," Carl said. "Why do you need to be here?" Mia replied. "You did everything to send Wendy to intensive care. If you want to know something, call the perinatal center." Carl returned to the city, and Mia stayed at home, not knowing what to do. When the terrible news came that Wendy had died from blood loss, Mia was devastated. No amount of intensive care could save her. The story continued to unfold. The baby was born prematurely and would have to stay in the neonatal intensive care unit for a long time. After Wendy's funeral, Carl left for Germany but managed to say goodbye to his daughter before departing. He continued to send money for Mia and their daughter, and when the baby was discharged from the hospital, Mia took custody of her. Carl planned to return to reclaim his parental rights and raise his daughter himself. Mia gave birth to her son, Steve, on time. The custody documents for Alice were prepared, and she was discharged from the hospital at the same time as her newborn brother. Mia returned home with 2 children, and she was welcomed by the godparents who had baptized Wendy. They drank to the health of the new mother and the children and also paid their respects to Wendy. From the very beginning of life with 2 children, Mia faced significant challenges. Carl continued to send money and called twice a week to check on his daughter's growth and how Mia was managing. After 2 months of constant childcare, Mia was exhausted. She told Carl about her fatigue, the lack of milk, and the difficulties with cooking and shopping. Carl suggested hiring a live-in nanny. Mia, at the limit of her strength, agreed. 2 days later, a nanny arrived, and life began to improve. The children grew, and Mia took joy in watching them, but she couldn't shake the longing for Wendy. When Steve and Alice turned 6 months old, Carl visited the village. He had only seen pictures of his daughter but had not met Mia's son. When Carl saw Steve, he noticed a striking resemblance to himself and asked Mia how she managed to achieve this. Mia was silent, unsure of how to explain. Carl persistently demanded an answer. "Say something. Why are you silent?" Mia replied, "He's your son, and you can see that yourself." Carl was stunned and said, "I came to restore my parental rights and take Alice with me, but it seems I don't need to prove that I'm Steve's father." "I'm not denying you my parental rights." Mia was surprised. "How can this be? Will I be raising Alice while knowing my son is growing up without me?" Carl continued, "I'm planning to stay in Germany permanently. I've been offered a permanent job. I still love you. Come with me. Let's get married and raise our children together." Mia was taken aback by the proposal. Her feelings were mixed. On one hand, she felt a connection to Carl and the possibility of building a life together, but on the other hand, she was uncertain about her own desires and how the future would unfold with 2 children. "I think you've grown attached to Alice, and it will be hard for you to part with her," Carl said. Mia remained silent, unsure of how to respond. "Mia, don't refuse. Think about it. What's keeping you here? The grave of Wendy?" Mia answered, "I understand that losing our daughter is hard, and your pain is still fresh, but think about it. We need to care for the living children. We can still visit Wendy's grave. There's another life, Mia. There's a future for our children. Think about it. We could be happy." Mia left with Carl and the children to Germany. She became happy for herself and for her daughter, Wendy. As they say, all's fair in love, but is that really true?